You posted on X a really long thread highlighting the fact that Trump isn't testifying, what that means, and you posed a really interesting question. You wrote this: what would Trump's testimony have looked like if he appeared on the stand today? Can you walk us through that? What would it have looked like?
Well, we have a couple of different data points. The first one is his previous testimony in this very case. So in that testimony, he lashed out. He lashed out at the attorney general. He lashed out at the judge, at one point yelling at the judge while he was on the stand, which is something that's very unusual to see in a courtroom. And he made all sorts of statements, many of which were not true. He tried to be in certain moments sort of calm and relaxed, and he was at certain times. But there was also just sort of this unpredictability of the whole thing. Another thing that we can look at is that the only Trump that the defense called as a witness was Donald Trump Jr. And they called off Eric Trump's testimony. They handled Ivanka Trump's testimony all through cross-examination when she was called by the state, and they now called off Donald Trump himself as well. In Don Jr.'s testimony, when he was called by the defense, basically they sort of went through a glossy PowerPoint and said, hey, look at all these beautiful buildings that the Trump family owns. They went through sort of the Trump family history, what all has Donald Trump built up, taking a business that his father and even his grandfather before him sort of planted the seeds for, and harvesting them and growing them over several decades. And here's what it's all turned into. There was a lot of pretty pictures to look at, and Don Jr. used words like magnificent, extraordinary, lots of superlatives to describe these assets. But of course, superlatives isn't how you value how many millions of dollars something is worth. You do that by looking at hard numbers. What are the square footages of a particular property? What the net operating income is of a particular property. And there was very little of those hard numbers. Some of the hard numbers that did appear in the presentation weren't true. How many floors were in a particular building, for instance? They listed an inflated number of floors that were in his property, both in Las Vegas and another one in New York. So if you look at those sort of data points, you can say, okay, so maybe this would have been kind of a, Donald Trump leaning back and saying, here's all that I've created. But then again, maybe he just would have used it as a moment to, wage war against the judge and anybody else in the courtroom who he wasn't satisfied with, and then use that to push this sort of grievance that he's been pushing since the start of the trial. I don't think that we would have seen any, new substantial information or testimony coming from Donald Trump that would have tipped the scale in the actual trial.